Shalom, YouTube. Obey the commandments of God. All of our problems from the very beginning in the Garden of Eden have occurred because we have not kept the commandments of God. One thing I'd like to say about the Garden of Eden, I heard from a Muslim street preacher, not personally, but over the internet. It was that big fat one. Dude looked pretty tall too, maybe like 6'5". Big fat dude standing on a pier. I don't know his name, I don't really care. But he said that Adam and Eve didn't disobey God when they ate the fruit. It wasn't that Satan tempted them in the form of the serpent. He said that they forgot the commandment, that they forgot that they weren't supposed to eat it. They didn't knowingly transgress. So, just be aware of the Gnostic heresies regarding these commandments. So from the very beginning, Genesis 2:16, Yahweh God commanded the man, saying, Of every tree of the garden you may freely eat, but of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil do not eat, for in the day that you eat thereof you shall die. Well, the day was actually 1,000 years. You can read about that in the book of Jubilees, which was removed from the canon of the Bible by the Herodian dynasty, I believe. But the previous Hasmonean dynasty of maybe like 150 before Christ took it as authentic. Genesis 3:11, who told you that you were naked? Have you eaten of the tree where I commanded you that you should not eat? Because you have listened to the voice of your wife and have eaten of the tree of which I commanded you, saying, You shall not eat of it. Cursed is the ground for your sake. In sorrow you shall eat of it all the days of your life. Right there. For disobeying God's commandments, the ground was cursed. This is why we suffer. Genesis 6:22. Thus did Noah according to all that God commanded him. So did he. So God commanded him to build a boat to preserve life. If God commands you to do something, you must obey it. It's just basically, this is a binary universe. And if you obey the commandments of God, the binary works in your favor. If you disobey the commandments of God, the binary works against you. Basically, everything God made is like, it just runs off of logic patterns. This really is like a computer universe. It's, ones and zeros, yes and no. And the commandments of God are the foundation of this universe. So Noah brings in, they went in male and female of all flesh as God commanded him, and the Lord shut him in. So Abraham circumcised his son Isaac, being 8 days old, as God commanded him. So God was pleased with Abraham because he obeyed all his commandments. He kept his commandments, his statutes, and his laws. So let's fast forward to the next book. So this is Genesis. Let's get to Exodus. Moses told Aaron all the words of Yahweh who had sent him and all the signs which he had commanded him. And you shall speak all that I command you, and Aaron your brother shall speak unto Pharaoh. He shall send the children of Israel out of his land. Aaron and Moses did as God commanded him, so did they. God, 8:27, we will go 3 days' journey into the wilderness and sacrifice to Yahweh our God as he has commanded us. See, God commanded us to give burnt sacrifices to him. This is something that's been forgotten. We can see burnt sacrifices from the very beginning. Adam and Eve had two children, Cain and Abel. Abel gave a proper burnt sacrifice of animal fat, and of clean animal fat, of lamb fat, and Cain gave a burnt sacrifice of fruit. And Abel's sacrifice was received, and Cain's was not, and he became angry. So, 15:26, if you will diligently hearken to the voice of Yahweh your God, and will do all which is right in his sight, and will give ear to his commandments, and keep all these statutes, I will put none of these diseases upon you, which I have brought upon the Egyptians, for I am Yahweh that heals you, which I believe the word here is Raphael. Raphael, God which heals. So, God gives commandments, we obey the commandments, and it goes well for us. Let's get to the next book, Leviticus. See, they build the tabernacle so God can dwell among them. They build the tabernacle, the Ark of the Covenant. The glory of God is contained in the Ark of the Covenant in the tabernacle, and God speaks to them. This is Exodus 40. Moses did according to all that Yahweh commanded him. They build the tabernacle. He put the bread upon it. This is like the first Solomon's temple, basically. He lit the lamps, etc., etc. Okay, Leviticus. If a soul shall sin through ignorance against any of my commandments, it basically says you have to give burnt sacrifices for your sins. So let's get to Numbers. So basically everything in the Bible, probably every single book in the Bible, it's God saying through a prophet or through a scribe or a wise man, keep the commandments of God and it will go well for you. Christians who actually love God have been so brainwashed by Roman pagan traditions to not keep the law of Moses because we think it's a curse. So the children of Israel did, Numbers 2:34, the children of Israel did all according to the commandments that God gave to Moses. So they pitched by their standards, etc., etc. I mean, Deuteronomy just puts it all out there. Deuteronomy is like repeatedly saying, if you don't keep the commandments, this will happen. If you do keep the commandments, this will happen. I commanded you. Let's get to, you shall not add unto the word which I command you, neither shall you take away from it, that you may keep the commandments of Yahweh your God, which I command you. Behold, I have taught you statutes and judgments, even as Yahweh my God has commanded me, so that you should do so in the land where you go to possess it. And just repeatedly, just keep the commandments, showing mercy unto thousands of them that love me and keep my commandments. Keep the Sabbath day to sanctify it, as Yahweh your God has commanded you. Remember that you were a slave in the land of Egypt, and God, Lord your God, commanded you to keep the Sabbath day. Honor your father and your mother, as Yahweh your God has commanded you. It's just so many verses, like every single verse is practically about the commandments. So keep the commandments, keep the commandments, keep the commandments. Let's get into the book of Joshua now. So Joshua succeeds Moses. So the Torah was written by Moses, and Joshua continues the lineage of Moses. All right, let's get to... Let me hit pause real quick. 6:30. All right, so we're going to finish with Deuteronomy. Many commandments God gives. Many commandments God gives. All for our best. I mean, we had one commandment with Adam and Eve. That was apparently too difficult for Adam and Eve. Now we have several commandments. Joshua 1:7. Only be strong and very courageous, that you may observe to do according to all the law which Moses my servant commanded you. Turn not to the right or to the left. So Moses gave us the Torah, and from the very beginning, God is commanding us, don't eat from the fruit of the knowledge of good and evil. And you have broken this commandment, therefore the land is cursed. So the Torah is about the commandments. Joshua is about the commandments. Let's get to the end of Joshua. Judges 2:17. Yet they would not listen unto their judges, but went a whoring after other gods, and bowed themselves unto them, and turned quickly out of the way which their fathers walked in, obeying the commandments of Yahweh, but they did not so. And the anger of Yahweh was hot against Israel, and said, because that this people has transgressed my covenant which I commanded their fathers, and have not listened to my voice. Basically, God says he's not going to drive out the Philistines anymore, and he's going to use them to test Israel. So they were to prove Israel by them, to know whether they would listen unto the commandments of Yahweh, which he commanded their fathers by the hand of Moses. So, commandments. We get to Ruth. This is not from God, though. 1 Samuel 2:29. Wherefore kick you at my sacrifice and at my offering, which I commanded in my habitation, and honored your sons above me, to make yourself fat with the chiefest of all the offerings of Israel. If you will fear God and serve him and obey his voice, and not rebel against the commandments of Yahweh, then shall both you and also the king that reigns over you continue following Yahweh your God. But if you will not obey the voice of the Lord, but rebel against the commandments of Yahweh, then shall the hand of Yahweh be against you, as it was against your fathers. I mean, there you go. It's like right there. If you read the Bible, you see that we're cursed for disobeying the commandments. So anyone who has a logic-oriented brain should put two and two together. And it's like, why isn't this technology making our lives better? There's so much money out there from all this wonderful technology, and none of it helps the poor. Why is it that everything gets worse? We don't obey the commandments of God. That's it. So, obey the commandments, obey the commandments, obey the commandments. Let's get to 2 Samuel. So David did so as Yahweh had commanded him, and smote the Philistines. So keep the commandments and everything goes well. Let's get to the next book, 1 Kings. Keep the charge of Yahweh your God, to walk in his way, to keep his statutes and his commandments and his judgments and his testimonies, as is written in the law of Moses. I believe this is David speaking to Solomon before he dies. And it says that, this is God speaking to him in his dream, 1 Kings 3:14. If you will walk in my ways to keep my statutes and my commandments, as your father David did walk, then I will lengthen your days. So Solomon kept the commandments at first, but then he was turned aside to pagan women, and it all went badly. 2 Kings chapter 11. Let's see. All right, let me see if I can get to another book. I want to see, because the prophets say the same thing. That's how we know that the New Testament and the Old Testament are basically part of the same book. because the New Testament and the Old Testament tell us to keep the commandments of God, aside from the writings of Paul, but that was mostly for like the Gentile converts. Paul was telling the Gentiles they didn't have to worry about the law of Moses, which I disagree with, but that's what Paul was going about. All right, Second Chronicles. Where do we get to the? Where's the prophets? Ezra. Oh yeah, well Ezra was a prophet, but this book isn't a book of prophecy. Ezra, Nehemiah. Anyway, there's like literally 800 verses. Go on Bible Gateway, type command, and you're going to see a bunch of these verses. God gave us commandments to keep the commandments. God commanded us to keep his commandments. That's as simple as it gets. And if we will not keep the commandments, then the hand of God will be against us, just as the hand of God was against our ancestors, the heathens and the Jews who disobeyed God. Shalom, people. God bless.